The land stretched endlessly beneath a sky painted in hues of gold and rust. Dust rose with every whisper of wind, dancing lazily through the tall fields of wheat. At the heart of it all stood the McCade ranch, sprawling, weathered, and alive with the stubborn resilience of a man who refused to let go of what was his. Thomas M.C., widowed at 42, was as much a part of the land as the red clay it sat on. His shoulders were as broad as the barn beams, his hands calloused from years of work. His jaw, often shadowed with stubble, was perpetually set in a grim line. Folks in town called him proud. Others called him hard. Those who truly knew him, few as they were, called him lonely. Since his wife Eleanor had died 5 years earlier, Thomas had retreated into silence. He spoke little, laughed never, and buried himself in work, raising cattle and keeping the farm alive with little help beyond the ranch hands. He had a daughter, Mary, just 14, who carried Eleanor's soft eyes, but none of her quiet patience. Thomas loved her fiercely, but the gulf between them had grown. Grief had hardened him, and Mary, still tender, still searching for warmth, often felt like she was reaching for a father locked behind stone walls. That morning, Thomas stood by the paddock, his hat tilted low, watching a mare struggle to rise. The horse had been injured days before, and the ranch hands hadn't known what to do. He'd called the local vet clinic in a rare act of desperation, though he regretted it almost instantly. Asking for help was not something Thomas McCade did easily. The rumble of an engine broke the stillness. A white pickup truck pulled into the yard and a woman stepped out, brushing dust from her jeans. She wasn't what Thomas expected. Dr. Clara Bennett was 32 with auburn hair pulled back in a no-nonsense braid and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. She carried herself with quiet authority, her posture upright, her expression determined. There was no timid hesitation in her stride as she approached the paddock. Only focus. "Where's the mayor?" she asked briskly, her voice calm but firm. Thomas squinted at her. "Over there," he said, his tone clipped, his hand gesturing toward the trembling animal. Clara walked past him without another word, crouching beside the horse. She laid a hand on the mayor's neck, speaking in a soothing murmur, then glanced up at the rancher. "She's dehydrated, feverish. You've been working her too hard." Thomas bristled. "That horse has carried more weight than most men could manage. She's tough." Clara's eyes flashed. "She's dying if you don't listen." For a moment, silence crackled between them, thick as a summer storm. No one had spoken to Thomas McCade like that in years. His ranch hands wouldn't dare. Even Mary skirted around his temper. Yet here was this stranger, this woman, staring him down with fire in her eyes. He should have told her to pack up and leave. He should have reminded her whose land she was on. Instead, he stepped back, jaw tightening, and muttered, "Do what you have to." Clara worked efficiently, setting up in 4, administering medicine, whispering reassurances to the animal as if her voice alone could heal. Thomas watched her from the corner of his eye, trying not to show his unease. Something about her stirred irritation, but also uncomfortably curiosity. Mary wandered into the paddock, her brown hair loose around her shoulders. "Is she going to be okay?" she asked, her voice hopeful. Clara smiled softly, her expression gentler now. "She will with some care. But she'll need rest. No writing, no work for a while." Mary nodded, relief flooding her features. "Thank you." Thomas shifted, uncomfortable at how easily Clara connected with his daughter. Mary hadn't smiled like that in weeks. Not at him, at least. By late afternoon, the mayor was resting peacefully. Clara packed her supplies into the truck, wiping sweat from her forehead. "I'll need to come back tomorrow to check her vitals," she said. Matter-of-factly, "That won't be necessary," Thomas replied curtly. Clara raised an eyebrow. "If you want her to survive, it is." Thomas's jaw worked, the muscle ticking. He wasn't used to being challenged. "Fine." Tomorrow, he muttered. Mary shot her father a look, then turned to Clara with a grateful smile. Thank you for helping. Really? Clara returned the smile, then glanced at Thomas one last time. You might not like asking for help, Mr. McCade, but sometimes even the strongest need it. With that, she climbed into her truck and drove off, leaving Thomas standing in the dust, staring after her. That night, as the ceases sang in the fields, and Mary slept peacefully for the first time in days, Thomas sat alone on the porch. His whiskey glass glinted in the moonlight, untouched. Clara Bennett. She was trouble, he told himself. Trouble wrapped in stubbornness and green eyes that saw too much. And yet, as the stars wheeled overhead, he knew one thing with unsettling certainty. She wasn't going away. And perhaps, deep down, a part of him didn't want her to. The next morning broke with a pale, cold light spreading across the horizon. A thin mist clung to the fields, softening the edges of the rugged ranch. Thomas MC was already awake, as he always was before the first rooster crowed. He moved with practiced efficiency, his boots crunching on the gravel, his hat low against the dawn chill. The mare was alive, barely. She shifted weakly when Thomas approached, her eyes clearer, but still clouded with exhaustion. He set down a bucket of water, muttering under his breath. He didn't say it out loud, but he knew Clara Bennett had saved her life. By mid-morning, the sound of the white truck rolled up the dirt drive again. Thomas felt his shoulders tense. He hated needing anyone, especially someone like her. But when Clara stepped out, hair loose today around her face, sun glinting on her auburn strands, his irritation tangled with something far more dangerous. Morning, Clara greeted, not waiting for an invitation. She carried her medical kit and headed straight for the paddock. Thomas followed her with a scowl. You're punctual. I said I'd be here at 10:00, she replied briskly, kneeling beside the mare. When I make a promise, I keep it. There was an edge in her tone, but beneath it, a quiet steadiness. Thomas crossed his arms, watching her check the horse's heartbeat. Adjust the whisper softly in a way that calmed the animal instantly. You treat her like she's family, he muttered almost accusingly. Clara glanced up at him, her eyes sharp. She is. Every creature that depends on you is family. Isn't that what being a rancher is about? Thomas felt the words land heavier than he wanted to admit. His mind flicked to Mary, his daughter, who often ate alone at the kitchen table, waiting for scraps of conversation he rarely gave. Mary came running then, her skirt brushing against her boots, cheeks flushed with excitement. Dr. Bennett, she called, breathless. I brought you some lemonade. It's hot out today. Clara's expression softened instantly as she accepted the glass. Thank you, sweetheart. That's thoughtful. Mary's smile widened at the kindness, her eyes shining in a way Thomas hadn't seen in years. She sat beside Clara, peppering her with questions. How did you learn to help animals? Do you have horses of your own? Was it scary being a vet? Clara answered patiently, weaving humor into her words, sometimes laughing outright. The sound of it startled Thomas. It had been so long since laughter had echoed through this ranch. He stood at a distance, arms crossed, his chest tightening at the sight of his daughter connecting so easily with this stranger. Part of him wanted to interrupt to remind Clara that this was his home, his land, his family. But another part, one he fought to silence, was grateful. Later, when Clara packed up her kit, she turned to Thomas. She's improving, but I'll need to come back daily for the next week. After that, we'll see. Thomas's jaw clenched. Daily? Clara raised an eyebrow. Unless you want her to relapse. His silence was answer enough. Clara smiled faintly, though there was no softness in it. I'll see you tomorrow, Mr. McCade. As her truck disappeared down the dusty road, Mary turned to her father, her voice bubbling with excitement. She's amazing, isn't she? You like her, don't you? Thomas's head snapped around, his face darkening. "Don't talk nonsense," he barked. Mary's smile faltered, her shoulder slumping. "It's not nonsense. She's different. She cares." Thomas turned away, guilt gnawing at him, though his pride kept his lips sealed. That night, the ranch was quiet, the ceases humming under a heavy summer moon. Thomas sat on the porch, whiskey glass in hand, staring into the distance. He thought of Clara's steady hands, the fire in her eyes when she stood up to him, the way Mary had lit up in her presence. It unnerved him. He hadn't let anyone close since Eleanor. Not friends, not neighbors, not even his daughter. Not really. He'd built walls so high he thought no one could climb them. Yet somehow Clara Bennett had walked straight onto his land and started planting cracks in the stone. He drank the whiskey in one burning swallow. "She won't last," he muttered to himself. "No one ever does." The next day, Clara returned again, her truck rattling into the drive like clockwork. This time, she didn't just tend to the mayor. She walked the ranch with Mary, pointing out weak fences, unhealthy cattle, things Thomas had overlooked in his obsession with control. When he confronted her later, his voice was like gravel. "I didn't ask for your advice about my ranch." Clara met his glare without flinching. "And yet you needed it." His fists clenched at his sides. "You don't know the first thing about this land." "About me." Clara tilted her head, her eyes narrowing with quiet challenge. "Maybe not. But I know this. Your daughter is lonely. She craves a father, not just a man who keeps the ranch running." The words hit harder than he wanted to admit. For a moment, Thomas looked away, his throat tight. No one had dared speak to him that way since Eleanor. "Get off my land," he growled. Clara's gaze lingered on him. Steady, unwavering. But she didn't argue. She packed her kit, walked to her truck, and drove off without another word. That evening, Mary cornered him in the kitchen, her voice trembling. "Why did you send her away?" Thomas slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes rattle. "Because she doesn't belong here." Mary's eyes filled with tears, her voice breaking. "Maybe she belongs more than you think." She ran from the room before he could answer, her sobs echoing down the hallway. Thomas stood frozen, his heart pounding, his hands still pressed against the scarred wood of the table. Outside, the night spread heavy and endless. And for the first time in years, Thomas MC wondered if his walls were not protecting him, but destroying everything he had left. The sun rose in streaks of gold across the rolling fields. Yet Thomas McCade no warmth. The fight with Mary echoed in his mind like the ghost of a gunshot. Her words had cut deeper than he cared to admit. "Maybe she belongs more than you think." By the barn, the mayor lifted her head weakly and nickered. She was alive, clinging to the fragile thread Clara had given her. Clara. Thomas cursed under his breath. He had told her to stay away, and yet the thought of her never returning lodged in his chest like a stone. Late that morning, the sound of gravel crunching reached his ears. His fists tightened. Clara's white truck appeared through the shimmering haze of heat. Against his better judgment, a strange relief washed through him. Clara stepped out, calm as ever, carrying her kit. She didn't acknowledge his scowl. Instead, she walked straight toward the paddock. Mary came running, her braid bouncing behind her, eyes lighting up as though Christmas had come early. "You came back?" Mary exclaimed, nearly tackling Clara with a hug. "I said I would," Clara answered with a gentle smile, glancing only briefly toward Thomas, who lingered like a shadow by the barn. Mary chattered endlessly as Clara worked, telling her about a wild rabbit she'd seen. About the way the roses were blooming by the fence, about the loneliness of the big house. Clara listened, laughed, asked questions as though every word mattered. From a distance, Thomas watched his daughter's smile stretch wider than he'd seen in years. His pride wanted to drag Clara off his land, but his heart, damn his heart, couldn't ignore what she was giving Mary. That afternoon, Clara was preparing to leave when a different truck pulled into the yard. A black pickup, polished and sharp. Dust cloud trailing behind. From it stepped Samuel Darden, their neighbor to the east, a man known for his greed and his hunger for land. Thomas's jaw hardened. Well, Samuel drawled, his eyes sliding toward Clara, lingering a beat too long. Didn't know you had company, McCade. Thomas's voice came low. Dangerous. State your business, Darden. Samuel smirked, ignoring the warning. Just thought I'd stop by, make another offer. That north pasture of yours is wasted on thin cattle. I could put it to better use. Let's talk numbers. I told you before, Thomas growled. The land's not for sale. Samuel's eyes flicked to Clara again, his smile turning sly. Suit yourself. Shame though. Thought maybe with a lady around you'd be more reasonable. Women tend to soften hard men. Clara stiffened, her cheeks coloring. Before Thomas could respond, she stepped forward, her tone sharp. I think it's time you left, Mr. Darden. Samuel blinked, surprised at her boldness. Then he chuckled, tipping his hat mockingly. You've got fire. Careful, McCade. If you're not careful, someone else might just steal it. His words hung heavy as he climbed back into his truck and sped off, the engine growling. Thomas stood rigid, fury blazing in his chest. But beneath the anger was something else, fear. Samuel Darden had wanted his land for years, and now with Clara here, the man had found a new way to get under his skin. That evening, silence filled the kitchen. Mary pushed food around her plate, sneaking glances at her father. Thomas's mind churned, replaying Samuel's smirk, his words, Clara's steady defiance. Finally, Mary whispered, "She stood up for us, Papa." Thomas met her eyes, the steel in his softening. She doesn't know what she's getting into. Mary's gaze didn't waver. Maybe you don't either. The days that followed slipped into an uneasy rhythm. Clara returned each morning, checking the mayor, walking the ranch, answering Mary's endless questions. She and Thomas exchanged words sparingly, but every glance was charged. Sometimes with irritation, sometimes with something far more dangerous. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the horizon, Clara lingered by the corral. Thomas approached, his hat low, his face half in shadow. You shouldn't have spoken to Darden like that, he said gruffly. Clara folded her arms unshaken. Why not? Someone had to. You don't know the kind of man he is. He doesn't forgive insults. He'll come back. Clara's gaze met his unwavering. Then let him. I won't stand by while a man like that pushes you or your daughter around. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Thomas searched her face, expecting arrogance, but all he found was conviction. It unsettled him. You're reckless, he muttered, though his voice lacked its usual bite. Or maybe I just care, Clara answered softly, her eyes glinting in the fading light. The words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning neither dared name. Thomas looked away first, his chest tight, his defenses cracking one by one. That night, alone in his room, Thomas stared at the photograph on his nightstand. Eleanor's face smiled back at him, forever frozen in time. Guilt nodded at him like it always did. How could he let himself feel anything for another woman when her memory still lived inside these walls? And yet, Clara's voice echoed in his mind. Maybe I just care. He set the picture frame down with a trembling hand and whispered into the empty room, What am I doing? The storm clouds gathered over the ranch 2 days later. Samuel Darden returned, not with an offer this time, but with a threat. He leaned on his truck, spitting tobacco into the dirt. You think you can ignore me, McCade? Think again. That land will be mine one way or another. Don't make me take it the hard way. Thomas's blood ran cold. Clara, who had been tending to the mayor nearby, froze at the sound of his words. Get off my land, Thomas said, his voice low and dangerous. Samuel smirked, climbing into his truck. Enjoy your little vet while you can. Folks like her don't stay long. And when she's gone, you'll wish you'd listened. The truck roared away, leaving dust and dread behind. Thomas stood motionless, his fists clenched, the weight of his loneliness pressing harder than ever. For the first time in years, he realized the ranch wasn't just his to protect anymore. Mary was attached, and against his will, so was he, and Samuel Darden had just made both of them targets. The summer sun had turned relentless, baking the soil until it cracked. Yet the MC Ranch thrummed with unease far colder than the weather. Ever since Samuel Darden's last visit, a shadow had stretched across the land as though his words had stained the very air. Thomas felt it in every step of his boots, every time his eyes scanned the fence lines. Darden was a vulture circling, waiting for weakness. And weakness, Thomas feared, was exactly what Clara brought. She had become part of the ranch without permission. Each morning her white truck rolled in as though she had always belonged. Her laughter mixing with Mary's like wind through wheat. She had mended more than the Mars health. She had mended pieces of Mary's childhood that Thomas hadn't even realized were broken. And that was the danger. One morning, Thomas found Clara and Mary kneeling by the corral fence, giggling as they tried to coax a stubborn calf closer with apples. The sight pulled him in before he could stop himself. Clara's hair had slipped loose from its braid, strands glinting like copper under the sun. She looked young, free, alive, everything he had denied himself for years. Mary spotted him and waved. "Papa, look. He likes her better than me." The calf butted Clara's palm gently, licking the apple. Clara grinned, brushing her hands off on her jeans. "Animals trust kindness," she said, turning toward Thomas. "They feel it." Her gaze lingered on him a beat too long, and his chest tightened. He muttered something about chores and stalked off, but her eyes followed him as if peeling back layers he wasn't ready to expose. That evening, trouble arrived. Smoke, thin, curling smoke drifting from the north pasture. Thomas saw it first from the porch, his gut dropping. Grabbing his rifle, he sprinted toward the fence line. The grass burned low and fast, the kind of fire set by a hand, not lightning. Someone had tossed an oil-soaked rag into the dry brush. "Darden," Thomas growled. The bastard hadn't even tried to hide it. He shouted for help, and Clara came running, Mary, right behind her. "Get her inside," Thomas barked, pointing at his daughter. But Clara didn't move. Instead, she seized a shovel leaning against the barn and dashed toward the flames. "If this spreads, you'll lose half your pasture," she shouted. Clara, she didn't listen. Swinging the shovel, she beat back the flames. Her clothes and face smeared with soot, hair sticking to her forehead. Thomas cursed and rushed to her side. Both of them working furiously until the fire shrank and finally died out, leaving blackened earth and the accurate stench of smoke. Thomas dropped to his knees, chest heaving. Clara coughed, wiping soot from her cheek with a trembling hand. "You're insane," he growled, grabbing her shoulders. His hands tightened without meaning to. "You could have been burned alive. And what? You wanted to do it all yourself." She shot back, eyes flashing. "This is my fight, too, Thomas. I won't stand by while someone destroys what you've built." Her words pierced deeper than any wound. He stared at her, fury and fear tangling into something else entirely, something dangerous. For a long, charged moment, neither moved. The heat between them felt hotter than the fire itself. Finally, Thomas tore his hands away, standing so abruptly it made Clara flinch. "Stay out of it," he rasped, turning his back. "This ranch, this family, it's not yours." Clara's voice cracked, quiet, but firm. Maybe it could be. That night, rain finally came, washing away the smoke, but not the tension. Thomas sat by the fireplace, whiskey glass untouched, staring at the flames. Mary had gone to bed hours earlier, but her voice still echoed in his mind. She makes me happy, Papa. The words twisted inside him. How could he deny his daughter the light Clara brought? And yet, how could he allow himself to feel it, too, when every smile from Clara pulled him farther from Eleanor's memory? He buried his face in his hands, muttering curses. But no amount of whiskey drowned the truth. He wanted Clara. Not just her skill, not just her presence for Mary. He wanted her. The next morning, Clara came earlier than usual. Thomas found her in the barn checking the mare, her touch gentle, her voice low. He lingered at the doorway. Unseen. You're stronger than he knows, Clara whispered to the horse, though Thomas suspected she wasn't speaking only to the animal. He hides behind his anger, but it's just fear. Fear of losing what's left of his heart. Her words struck him like a blow. She saw through him too easily. When she turned and spotted him, she startled, then steadied herself. The mayor's healing well, she said briskly, but her eyes betrayed her. They held the same storm that churned in his own chest. Thomas stepped closer, close enough to smell the faint trace of smoke still clinging to her hair. Why do you keep coming back? He asked, voice low. Clara's throat worked. Because you need me. Because she needs me. A pause, then softer, because I can't stay away. The silence stretched thick with everything unsaid. His hand twitched, aching to touch her, to pull her close and silence the ache between them. But at the last second, he stepped back, the weight of guilt chaining him. Leave before Darden drags you into more trouble. He muttered, his tone harsher than he intended. Clara flinched, pain flashing across her face. For a heartbeat, he thought she might walk out for good, but she squared her shoulders instead. You don't get to decide for me, Thomas MC. If Samuel Darden wants a fight, then let him come. I won't run. Not from him and not from you. Her words hung in the barn like thunder before a storm, and Thomas knew then that nothing would ever be the same. But Samuel Darden wasn't finished. That night, Thomas found one of his water tanks drained dry, the valve deliberately broken. The cattle loaded in distress, and fury roared through him. It was war now, and somewhere deep inside, Thomas realized he couldn't fight it alone anymore. Not against Darden, not against the emptiness that had ruled his house for years. Because Clara wasn't just mending animals or making Mary laugh. She was mending him, and that terrified him more than any fire in the fields. The ranch no longer felt like home. It felt like a fortress under siege. Thomas woke each morning with his hand reaching for his rifle before his boots even touched the floorboards. He rode the fence lines twice daily, looking for sabotage, for tracks, for anything that would prove what he already knew. Samuel Darden was circling, waiting for a chance to strike. But Darden wasn't his only battle. Clara had become too deeply entangled in his life. In Mary's life, in his heart. The thought of her laughter filling the house warmed him and terrified him because the more she stayed, the more he realized he didn't want her to leave. And that, he told himself, was weakness. The attack came just before sundown. Mary was playing on the porch with her dolls while Clara trimmed herbs she had planted by the kitchen window, insisting the house needed a touch of life. Thomas was saddling his horse when he saw dust rising at the gate. His pulse quickened. 2 riders, one of them unmistakable Samuel Darden. He strode out, jaw set, rifle slung across his arm. Evening, McCade, Darden drawled, his grin too wide, too hungry. Heard you had yourself a little fire. Shame about that pasture. Thomas's grip tightened on the rifle. You're trespassing now. Don't be so cold. Thought I'd come by. Pay my respects. Word around town is you got yourself a new woman here. Pretty one, too. Veterinarian, isn't she? Clara stiffened where she stood, hands curling into fists. Thomas stepped forward, blocking Darden's view of her. You keep her name out of your mouth. Darden laughed, a cruel sound. Oh, I struck a nerve. Imagine that. The great Thomas MC, still grieving his dead wife, suddenly cozying up to another so soon. What would Eleanor think? The words were a blade twisted cruelly. Thomas's body went rigid, fury flooding his veins. He raised the rifle just enough for Darden to see. "Get off my land." For a moment, tension stretched like a wire, ready to snap. Then Darden spat in the dirt, tugged his rez, and turned his horse. "Enjoy your evening, McCade. Won't be many more peaceful ones." As he rode off, Clara came to Thomas's side, her hand brushing his arm. "He's not going to stop," she whispered. Thomas didn't look at her. He couldn't. His chest heaved with too many emotions. Rage at Darden, guilt at Eleanor's memory, fear for Clara and Mary. He only muttered, "Not while I'm breathing." That night, the house felt too small, too quiet. Mary had fallen asleep quickly, but Clara lingered by the fire, her face half-lit by the flickering glow. "You can't face him alone," she said softly. "He won't fight fair, Thomas. He'll hurt the people around you first. He already tried with the fire. He'll come again." Thomas leaned against the mantel, staring into the flames. "I've dealt with men like him before. But not while raising a child," she countered. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with urgency. "And not with me here." Finally, his eyes met hers. What he saw there nearly undid him. Fear, yes, but also fire. She wasn't a woman running. She was standing, ready to fight beside him. "I don't want you in danger," he said horror-she. "And I don't want you carrying it all alone," she shot back. "You push everyone away, Thomas, but you can't push me. Not anymore." The silence between them burned hotter than the fire. His hands clenched at his sides, aching to reach for her, to pull her against him. He fought it. God, he fought it. But when Clara stepped closer, when her hand brushed his, the dam finally broke. He caught her face in his callous palms and kissed her. Hard, desperate. Years of loneliness and grief poured out in that one moment, clashing with the warmth of someone who dared to heal him. Clara gasped, then melted against him. Her hands gripping his shirt as though she'd been waiting as long as he had. The kiss deepened, fierce and unrelenting, until he tore himself away, breath ragged. "This is wrong," he rasped, though his body still a CHD for her. "I'm betraying her memory." "No," Clara whispered, touching his face, eyes shining with unshed tears. "You're living again. That's not betrayal. That's love finding you when you thought it never would." Her words gutted him. He pulled her into his arms again, this time slower, gentler, their foreheads pressed together. For the first time in years, Thomas allowed himself to imagine a tomorrow that wasn't filled with silence. But tomorrow wasn't safe. At dawn, Thomas woke to the sound of hooves. Too many hooves. He leapt from bed, grabbing his rifle, and glanced out the window. 3 riders this time. Darden wasn't alone. Panic surged. "Mary, Clara." He stormed down the hall, throwing open Mary's door. She was still asleep, clutching her doll. Clara, already dressed, appeared behind him, eyes wide but steady. "They're here," Thomas growled. Clara's jaw set. "Then we fight." They moved quickly. Thomas handed her a pistol from the locked cabinet, his hands brushing hers just long enough for a silent promise to pass between them. He would protect her. She would stand beside him. The riders circled near the barn, shouting threats, Darden's voice carrying above the others. "Come out, McCade. Let's finish this." Thomas stepped onto the porch, rifle raised. Clara stood just inside the door, pistol steady, eyes sharp. Mary stirred upstairs, unaware of the storm about to break. The standoff stretched, the air thick as thunderclouds. And Thomas realized something with brutal clarity. This wasn't just about land or power or grudges. This was about survival, about protecting what he loved. And God help him, he loved them both. The morning sun rose blood red over the McCade ranch, painting the horizon with the color of battle. Thomas stood on the porch, rifle in hand, eyes fixed on the 3 riders circling his barn. Samuel Darden led the pack, his sneer visible even at a distance. Clara stood just inside the doorway, pistol steady, her hair loose from the rush of waking, her breath coming fast but controlled. Upstairs, Mary stirred in her bed, still blissfully unaware of the danger surrounding them. The weight of it all pressed down on Thomas like a stone. His land, his daughter, this woman who had come into his life when he least expected it. Everything he loved was now a target. "Darden," Thomas shouted, voice carrying across the yard like thunder. "You set foot on this porch, and it'll be the last thing you ever do." Darden laughed, a cruel echoing sound. "Don't be dramatic, McCade. I just came to collect what's mine. That pasture, that herd, and maybe a little more. Heard you've been keeping company with the lady vet. Pretty thing. Maybe she'd like a real man to show her what life looks like outside a broken ranch." Clara stiffened, her grip on the pistol tightening. Thomas's blood ran hot, his vision tunneling until all he could see was Darden's smirk. "Say her name again," he growled. "And I'll put you in the ground." The other riders chuckled uneasily, their horses shifting. Darden, never one to back down, spat in the dirt, then prove it. The first shot rang out like lightning. Thomas ducked instinctively, firing back, the crack of his rifle echoing through the valley. Wood splintered as bullets ripped into the porch posts. Clara yanked Mary from her bed, clutching the child to her chest as she crouched behind the staircase. "Stay down, sweetheart," Clara whispered, her voice shaking but firm. "Stay very still." Mary's wide eyes brimmed with tears. "Is Daddy okay?" Clara forced a smile she didn't feel. "Your daddy's the bravest man I've ever known. He won't let anything happen to us." Another volley of gunfire rattled the walls. Clara ran to the window, cracked it open just enough, and fired. The shot startled one of Darden's men, sending his horse rearing. He toppled hard into the dirt, his gun skittering away. Thomas glanced back at her through the smoke of gunpowder, their eyes locking for a fleeting second. Pride, fear, love, it was all there. But Darden was relentless. He dismounted, using the barn as cover, inching closer with a revolver in hand. His men, less disciplined, began to falter under the return fire. But Darden's focus never wavered. "This ends today, McCade," he bellowed. Thomas knew it was true. Either Darden would leave in the dirt, or he would. He sprinted from the porch toward the barn, bullets whizzing past, his rifle bucking in his hands. He dove behind the water trough, breath ragged, mud splashing up his shirt. "Thomas!" Clara screamed from the porch. "Stay inside," he barked, not daring to glance back. Darden appeared from behind the barn, revolver aimed. Thomas fired, missed, rolled into cover again. The smell of smoke and gunpowder filled the air, mingling with the accurate stench of fear. Suddenly, a scream pierced the chaos. "Mary!" Thomas's heart nearly stopped. He spun toward the porch in time to see one of the riders, a scar-faced brute, grabbing Mary from Clara's arms. Clara fought like a wildcat, clawing, kicking, but the man shoved her heart against the wall, tearing the child free. "No!" Thomas roared, bolting upright. He sprinted across the yard, firing without aim. Consumed by rage, Clara scrambled to her feet, pistol raised, and with deadly precision shot the rider in the back. He dropped instantly, Mary tumbling from his grasp into the dirt. Thomas skidded to his knees, scooping his daughter into his arms. She sobbed into his chest, clutching his shirt. Clara rushed to them, blood trickling from her lip where she'd been struck, but her eyes burned with fire. "You're safe," Thomas whispered to Mary, voicing. "Daddy's here. You're safe." But Darden wasn't finished. The ranchard fell quiet for a beat, save for the labored breathing of men and horses. Then Darden stepped into the open, revolver leveled directly at Thomas. "You think you've won?" Darden sneered. "I'll burn this whole ranch to the ground. You, your brat, that woman, you'll all be nothing but ashes." Thomas rose slowly, setting Mary behind Clara, who shielded the girl with her body. He faced Darden alone, rifle in hand, eyes hard as stone. "This is my land," Thomas said, his voice low and steady. "My family. You won't touch them." Darden cocked the hammer. "Then die for them." The world slowed to a heartbeat. A shot rang out. For a moment, Thomas thought he'd been hit, but then Darden staggered, eyes wide in shock, a dark stain spreading across his chest. He crumpled to the dirt, gun slipping from his fingers. Clara stood behind Thomas, pistol smoking in her grip, breath ragged, hands trembling. "It's over," she whispered, voice breaking. Silence fell across the ranch. The last rider, seeing his leader dead, turned tail and galloped away, dust trailing behind him like a coward's banner. Thomas dropped his rifle, chest heaving, and turned to Clara. She was pale, shaking, but her eyes never wavered. Mary clung to her skirts, sobbing. He crossed the yard in 3 strides, pulling them both into his arms, holding them as though sheer strength could keep them safe forever. "You saved us," he murmured into Clara's hair, his voice thick. "You saved Mary. You saved me." Clara pulled back just enough to meet his eyes, her own shining with tears. "No, Thomas. We saved each other." That night, after the sheriff came to collect Darden's body, and the quiet of peace finally settled over the ranch, Thomas sat on the porch with Clara at his side. Mary slept soundly upstairs, exhausted but safe. The stars spread wide above them, endless and bright. Thomas took Clara's hand, rough fingers curling around hers. For once, he didn't fight the warmth that filled him. He didn't push it away. "All my life," he said softly, "I thought I'd already had my share of love. That when Eleanor died, so did the part of me that could feel it again. But then you came and you made me see that love isn't about replacing. It's about living." Clara's eyes filled with tears, her smile trembling. "You're not alone anymore, Thomas. And you never will be again." He leaned in, kissing her with all the tenderness he had denied himself for years. And under the wide Texas sky, with danger finally behind them and hope finally ahead, Thomas McCall allowed himself to believe in tomorrow for himself, for his daughter, for the woman who had mended his broken heart.